She joins us from Cairo. Here with me in the studio is Geneviève Garrigos. She's the president of Amnesty International France. Shireen Foti is an American and Egyptian lawyer. And in California tonight, Robert Springborg is a professor of national security affairs at the Naval Postgraduate School. Thanks to you all for being with us. We just heard the view, Shireen, from the street in Cairo about this trial today. Obviously, everybody glued to their television sets watching their former strongman in a hospital bed in a cage in court. Quite extraordinary. But do you think there's a difference in how his crimes are being viewed in Egypt as to how they're being viewed abroad?
I think the people of Egypt have recognized and lived with the effects of his crimes for so many years. This revolution, or I guess we can call it an uprising because it hasn't yet attained the status of revolution, but this has been an outpouring of anger at the lived experiences of millions of Egyptians with the state security forces, the abuses, the tortures, the utter poverty, the siphoning, the stealing of Egyptian resources and sending it abroad. This is just a reaction. And to see Mubarak guilty, or at least being questioned as to his guilt in a public courtroom is definitely a positive development. And I think the American line, or perhaps the foreign line in general, has been, yes, he should be tried at this point because we've decided to change our line as to how we're going to view Mubarak. However, we have to see what has the American role been in its context. And if we look at government documents, if we look at institutions such as the National Endowment for Democracy, the Rand Corporation, if we analyze their own documents and their own statements, we know that there is a policy that's in place now in the Arab world that is strictly for the infiltration of Arab governments and the kind of expropriation of the revolutions or of the uprisings for the good.
By that rationale, then, we can't blame Mubarak because he's simply been playing the game that he was forced to play by the West.
So
why should he be in court now facing charges?
He is complicit in those charges. He was a player and he acted in compliance with those dictates. However, the power structure has not ceased to exist, and it continues to be used now. And we see with candidates like Mohammed al-Baradei, who is now running for president.
The former head of the UN nuclear agency.
He has been promoting this similar agenda. He had already been recognized by this group called Kefaya, this uprising in Egypt, which began in 2005, which we know was strictly promoted by the American government, which was funded by this new Endowment for Democracy. So there's intense involvement in Egyptian society, and there's a quote here which states, a lot of what we are doing in the National Endowment of Democracy was done covertly 25 years ago by the CIA. That's Alan Weinstein stating in
trials. It means that the issues are still very sensitive. The pressure is there, and you have all the people who has taken advantage of the situation on those years that they are still there. It means that it's always difficult, but I don't think it's more difficult there than in other countries. What it will be difficult today is that the fact the army still has the power, that the state of emergency is still in place, and they still can arrest people and torture people, etc. This is also really a problem, and I think we have to emphasize that the trial
and
is
will
not
that be made better by the trial of Mubarak?
Yeah, but okay, but it's a step, but we have a lot of other steps, and when you look at the situation, including about economical, social, cultural rights, how poverty is criminalized today in Cairo and in Egypt by the army and some party. There is a lot of work to do, and I think we can trust the people. They want a fair trial, okay? And
okay, what? Sorry,
and I think it's also important that the army needs to be held accountable, because the army also did participate in the deaths that occurred during the revolution, and in the aftermath, since the Supreme Council for the Armed Forces has been in charge. They've attacked on numerous occasions Tahrir Square. They've attacked demonstrators. We just saw 2 days ago faces, bloody faces, people that, the families of martyrs that were sitting for 2 weeks or 3 weeks, I believe, in Tahrir Square, were attacked by the army after being given authorization to be there. So there's a clear problem and a clear discord between the army's actions behind the scenes and what they've been representing. And so we really need to have a civilian body in place in governance, and not a military body. And also we need to recognize that the military regime that is now in place is that of the former Mubarak regime. It is nothing different from what was already in place before. And so when we say Isqat al-Nizam, which is fall of the regime, that was the primary slogan during the revolution, during the uprisings, that means the fall of the entire regime, not just Mubarak and his sons. That's not adequate.
Right, absolutely. But what about what we're talking about is a huge change taking place. Egypt has been under a dictatorship for 5 decades. It's been under a dictatorship the whole time. Now it's moving towards democracy. Elections are slated for November. What about the South African model, for example, a Truth and Reconciliation Commission that was set up over time and which went through case by case, as you're saying, members of the military, members of the security forces, members of the police. What about something like that?
I think that's a very important model that should be followed as well. I was in Egypt in February and talking to members of the judiciary and members of the legal profession there. A primary model was the Constitution of Brazil, the Constitution of South Africa, and their role, the regional geopolitical role in the region. I think it's very important to look at examples of other countries, but always remembering that Egyptian sovereignty is extremely important here, because that's what has been at issue for the past 40 years. And we also know that there existed a social type welfare state during the era of Nasser, which was dismantled, step and step at a time by Sadat and then Mubarak. And we've seen, when we talk about state assets that were sold for just a fraction of their real price, and the
oil and gas sales. Well, that's part of the case against Mubarak at the moment. But I want to just stay on this idea of a South African model for the moment. What are your thoughts on that, Ahdaf in Cairo? Ahdaf Swaif, are you still with us? I think we've lost Ahdaf Swaif, unfortunately. What are your thoughts on that, Geneviève, about because we've got lots of, we've got no precedent here, but we've got lots of examples we can compare it to. Saddam Hussein in Iraq, for example, was another one which seems to be, obviously he was captured by the Americans, but he was tried by the Iraqis and he was sentenced to death. It doesn't seem to have done any good there, for example.
No, because it was, okay, the way it has occurred, it was, it didn't allow the people to know, all this process, truth, justice, and reparation, compensation, And the process is very important in order to rebuild behind, okay, and it didn't happen in Iraq, and we see the situation anyway today. I don't know if they okay, I know I am not a specialist of what's happening in South Africa, but anyway, I think also the situation was completely different, okay, and what's happening in Egypt and what it continued to happen in Egypt, okay, don't forget that since the army took the power after Mubarak left, 10,000 people were presented on military court for
civilians who
civilian, you know,
protesting,
some
right.
of them protesters, other okay, some robbery or things like that, but you know, very for freedom of expression, freedom of demonstration, etc., and with very unfair trial. In few minutes you are condemned, you know, and then you can see that the context, you know, it's really different on the context in South Africa. And here, when the people say we want to know what's happened, they want to know it now.
We're running out of time, Robert. I just wanted to bring you back on that point. If we could just hear your views on that.
Well, I think it's very important to discriminate between a political and a judicial process. Much of what's been discussed here is really going to have to be taken care of at a political level as the military is brought under civilian control, God willing, as Parliament begins to assert itself and so on. Then various of these political issues will be dealt with through normal democratic processes. So one is going to have to restrict pretty tightly, it seems to me, the judicial processes to quite specific crimes, or it'll make a mockery of the judicial system, and it will boomerang in its effect. So I think both things, the judicial and the political changes are the judicial trials and political changes are necessary. But I think the truth and reconciliation of the very grand sort that was achieved in South Africa is not possible in Egypt at the present time. And I think it would be better to focus much more on the political than on the judicial.
Okay, Robert Springborg, we'll have to leave it there. Sherine Foti, Geneviève Garrigos, and Adav Swift in Cairo, if you can still hear us. Many thanks to you all for joining us, and thanks to you, of course, for watching. That's it for tonight's debate. I'm sure we could discuss this for many hours. We're going to have to leave it there, I'm afraid. Business and news coming up after this.